the titles of my exhibitions come from a work in the show. And in this case, being like the largest work, I felt like it's really when I knew I was doing this work is when I started to figure out how to build around the show. And this kind of was like the starting point for the exhibition. I think the title Therapy, I don't know, it just felt right. A lot of times I title the works after they're finished. And I don't know, Therapy seemed like the correct title for this piece. You know, it started with I saw this photo online of a group of people holding paintings up, and it was like some sort of class for adults or something. And I just thought, like, you know, what a great thing to come and make pictures together, and then to be proud of these pictures and share them with other people. And that was really sort of the starting point. I guess you see so much imagery of people holding up signs and like trying to get a point across, or trying to like, it almost like to double down on the picture reinforces it. And you know, sometimes those signs are more abstract, and in this case, it's all focused on water, which I thought was like, if there's a sort of place you can go to, for me, water is calm. You know, water is like a relief. It's I think it's something universally shared, and that's why it's wound up in these pictures. Originally, Chum was one of the first characters I started working with in paintings, and it wasn't meant to carry on this long. You know, it wasn't something like when I started working with that imagery, I was thinking this is something that'll continue in the work for 25 years or whatever it's been. It's just, you know, it's just the way like a painter uses a figure to kind of project his feelings towards things. And for me, it's these characters. Like I like the way you can use a character to sort of emote and communicate with people. And it's, you know, I'd much rather be painting a character over and over than like a figure or a portrait or something with more human qualities. You know, the way I make pictures is just something that just comes naturally. I'm not, you know, I like color. I always gravitated towards color. You know, I like graphics and sort of the stuff that kind of intrigued me as a young person. And I always like to create paintings with a graphic quality, really flat quality. I mean, and this series is one of the, you know, first series where I'm kind of doing these gradations and adding depth in that way. But yeah, it's always like when I sit down to make a picture, it's kind of the direction I go in naturally. I tend to like to kind of control the space with paint and kind of, I don't know, leave a lot of the gestures out and kind of have these sort of clean depictions. It's funny because when I was in college, I was doing like realist oil painting, and everything was about the edges, the softness. And then when I started making paintings for myself, I just kind of went everything hard edge. And I was content with that for, you know, the last 20 years. But it's nice to kind of have this sort of new way of approaching painting. With the painting Insomnia, I just, you know, sort of found my way around it. It was made after Therapy, and I knew I wanted to kind of continue this motif of like cinder blocks. And you know, it started off in one direction, and I wasn't happy, and I reworked it, and that's kind of, you know, originally I was imagining the entire interior of the sign being a flat painting. And you know, a lot of these paintings, like I'm working in this style, I'm kind of finding my way around the medium, and sort of, you know, I go into it with my ideas, but then I'm open to sort of be redirected by whatever. Then after I complete the paintings, I think of the titles, and you know, I think it's just like these titles are just reflective. You know, the imagery and the titles are kind of just reflective of like what's going on right now, what sort of news is bombarding me. And I think it's, you know, it's in such a strange, uncertain time that I think it's unavoidable that comes out in the work and in the titles. With exit plan, it's funny, I was thinking of it as always as letting go, you know, sort of like choosing to not go on. But then my friend was here the other day and he's talking about how he was inspired by it and he saw it as climbing. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have these multiple sort of interpretations of the paintings. It's not, you know, I paint everything with what I have in mind, but you know, what someone else sees is completely their own. Borrowed Time has started off with me wanting to do an interior painting, like something that focused on an interior. But then the interior sort of became an outward world. And, you know, you kind of sense that this character is looking through blinds at something. You don't know really what he's looking at. And you would assume that the chaos is inside, but also, you know, bringing that sort of disruption into his interior space. Yeah, it's just, you know, I don't know, thinking of like, where is comfort? And sort of, at this point, like, where do you go to have peace? Often they do wind up being isolated and alone, but there was a certain point, like when I was working in sculpture, that there was a point with a sculpture called Along the Way, where I did this sort of double figure interacting, and then the dialogue is within them. And after that, then I started to think about, like, how do I create dialogues within a picture with figures? And before this, it was always this sort of like static, like single, you know, the viewer and the work. And I don't know, I go back and forth between like what I feel is needed or what I like to focus on. It's a sculpture that originated during COVID when I was doing, you know, we were doing these holiday projects before COVID, and we'd have these sort of, you know, large site-specific pieces where, you know, we invite, you know, over a few days, thousands of people would come out. And then COVID hit, and, you know, I do everything with my partner in Hong Kong, all rights reserved, and then we were just trying to think of, like, how do we still, you know, remain active? And so we did a project called Space, where we put one into the stratosphere, and we just filmed it. You know, we had it strapped to all these cameras, and we just had an online presentation of it. And that's kind of what was the starting point. That sort of figure has a history before. When I did 2013, when I redesigned the MTV Moon Man, and I don't know. I think it's a funny thing to focus on these days, like, you know, people's obsession with space, and, you know, it's kind of like ridiculous to sort of abandon Earth in favor of this thing that's pretty much inaccessible. You know, when I create a sculpture, I always imagine it having multiple lives, and existing at something that could be a few inches or, you know, 40 meters, or it just really depends on the context and the situation it's going to live in. And I do like the idea of having these toys that I created, these small editions that people live with domestically, and then also having this experience where they're, you know, dwarfed by them, and just sort of changing the dynamic. I think it's important when you're doing public work to kind of create something that could feel grounded in a space. And it's really, I think scale is a big part of that. I mean, painting is something you do need to, like, I don't know, when I go through periods of painting, I do try to focus and have just like long days of painting. But I'm constantly working on several things at once, whether it's like design projects or, you know, sculpture projects. It's the way my studio is structured. There's an upstairs and a downstairs, and I mostly spend my time upstairs by myself, and then I come downstairs, and, you know, I have staff and people I work with. But for me, painting is like the most sort of peaceful time when I can really just think about everything. You know, you spend so many hours on it, in front of a thing, or painting, like the sort of days kind of fly. And it's really, I don't know. If I don't paint for a while, I start to get on edge. And then I realize, oh, I haven't painted.